It was a Wednesday morning when everything seemed to fall apart for Jordan Daniels. The coffee in his cup had gone cold, the emails piled up like unopened letters of bad news, and the subtle tension in the office air hinted that something unusual was brewing. Jordan wasn't just another employee. He was the quiet type, the one who showed up early, left late, and didn't seek attention. He believed that hard work spoke louder than anything else. But that day it felt like no one was listening. Jordan worked as a systems analyst in a mid-sized tech company. Nothing flashy, but stable. Or so he thought. For the past year, he had poured his energy into a company-wide project, automating a large part of their outdated logistics process. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was vital. He stayed after hours, missing dinners with friends and even his younger sister's graduation. He did it because he believed in the work. But there's a strange thing about corporate ladders. They often creak under the weight of quiet consistency, while those who shout the loudest tend to climb the fastest. Enter Rick Halden, the manager of Jordan's department. Rick was known for his polished smile, crisp suits, and a habit of taking credit for things he didn't do. He had recently received internal praise for streamlining logistics and had even made it onto the company newsletter's front page. Of course, the ideas were Jordan's, the long nights, the technical planning, the testing, all Jordan. But Rick had overseen the department, and in corporate terms, that was apparently enough. What Jordan didn't know was that Rick saw him not as a valuable team player, but as a threat. Quiet people often are. They work in silence, let results speak, and unintentionally expose the ones who rely on appearance over substance. Rick couldn't afford that exposure, and so a plan was born. That Wednesday morning, Jordan was called into Rick's office. He walked in with his notepad, as he always did, ready to listen, but there was no invitation to sit this time. Rick stood behind his desk, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Jordan," Rick began, "we've been reviewing performance metrics, and unfortunately, we've found some concerning patterns in your recent work." Jordan blinked. "Patterns?" "Yes," Rick continued, flipping a few papers that seemed more like props than proof. "There's been a decline in collaborative input. Team members feel you've been isolated. We're concerned about your alignment with company culture." It felt surreal. Jordan had never been warned, never been told of any complaints, and certainly had no record of misconduct. Still, Rick spoke with the authority of a man who had already made a decision. "I'm going to recommend termination of your employment," Rick said, almost too casually. "HR will be here shortly." Jordan felt the room tilt. Fired? Just like that? But before he could respond, there was a knock. The HR rep stepped in, Rachel Turner, a woman known for her fairness and sharp memory. But she wasn't alone. Behind her walked in someone Jordan hadn't seen before. A woman in a gray blazer, clipboard in hand, and a look that didn't match the usual routine. "Mr. Halden," she said coolly, "we're here regarding your recent conduct in the Daniels case." Rick stiffened. "Conduct? This is a performance issue. As the manager, I have discretion." "No, you don't," the woman interrupted. "Not in matters where documentation has been falsified, and internal project contributions have been misrepresented." Rachel nodded beside her. "Jordan, thank you for your patience. Over the last few months, we've received multiple anonymous reports questioning credit distribution on the logistics project. We conducted an audit. The system logs, project updates, and version history all point to you as the primary contributor." Jordan's heart pounded. It felt like a weight had lifted, but the shock kept it from floating entirely. Rick tried to salvage control. He was part of the team. Of course his name would appear. But the idea? The implementation? The testing framework? "All his," the woman replied. "And it doesn't stop there." She handed Rick a folder. Inside were printouts, emails, chat logs, timestamps. It was clear someone had been watching, documenting. Rachel looked at Jordan. "You're not being fired. In fact, we're recommending you for a role in our strategic development team, a promotion. You've been underutilized, and we'd like to change that." Jordan blinked, unsure if he had heard right. A promotion? Rick, on the other hand, was asked to step outside. The door closed behind him like a verdict. What followed felt like a dream. Jordan sat with Rachel and the investigator, who turned out to be from the Internal Ethics Committee. They explained how his silent effort hadn't gone unnoticed, that sometimes systems, though flawed, can correct themselves when the right people speak up. As he walked out of the office that day, the air smelled different, lighter. He had come in on the edge of defeat and walked out with a new title, and the recognition he never asked for, but always earned. The lesson wasn't just about justice or karma. It was about patience, about doing the right thing, even when no one's watching, about trusting that integrity has a longer lifespan than manipulation. Jordan learned that day that your quiet work matters, that in a world obsessed with noise, stillness is power. That when distractions scream and shortcuts tempt you, the path of consistency and discipline leads further, even if it takes longer to be seen. He also learned another truth. Sometimes the most profound transformations begin in the quiet humiliation of being misunderstood. And sometimes HR walks in with more than just paperwork. They walk in with the truth. He stood in the hallway, numb. The laughter from inside the break room still echoed in his head. They hadn't even tried to whisper it. They thought he was out the door. One of the co-workers even said, "He was always too quiet to last here anyway." He wasn't angry, not exactly. It was something else, a deeper ache. Disappointment, maybe. Or the realization that no matter how hard you try, some people will only see what they want to see. But he didn't walk out. Instead, he walked back to his desk and kept working. HR hadn't officially spoken yet. Until that happened, he wasn't going to give up, not because he believed they'd save him, but because quitting would have meant agreeing with the people who thought he wasn't enough. 2 hours later, just as the sun began to cast golden lines across the office carpet, his desk phone buzzed. It was Elena from HR. "We need you in the conference room." As he walked in, the manager who had tried to fire him sat stiffly at the end of the table. 2 HR reps were already there, Elena and another man he didn't recognize. What happened next was a moment he'd replay in his head 1,000 times. Elena looked directly at the manager and said, "We've completed our investigation. The claims you filed against James," that was his name, James, were unfounded. In fact, our review of team performance shows that James consistently exceeded expectations, completed key assignments early, and supported other departments without ever seeking recognition. What's more concerning is the number of complaints we've received about management misconduct in your department." The room fell silent. The manager's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. James didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just waited. Elena continued. "Effective immediately, you will not be moving forward with any disciplinary action against James. And due to multiple issues raised by your behavior and leadership approach, we're placing you under formal review." It was like time froze. The power dynamic had flipped so fast that even James had trouble believing it. The HR rep beside Elena handed James a folder. "We're also officially recognizing your contributions with a performance-based bonus and offering you a seat on the Interdepartmental Project Steering Committee. That comes with a title change and pay increase." As he left the room, James felt none of the pride or vindication that people think comes with these moments. He felt quiet resolve, not because he'd won, but because he hadn't given up. He returned to his desk, same chair, same monitor, but everything had changed. People avoided eye contact at first. The same co-workers who had laughed now looked unsure. Guilty, maybe, but James didn't hold grudges. He focused on the work. He led that interdepartmental project to success. He mentored junior staff, and slowly, people began to see what had been there all along. Not someone quiet and forgettable, but someone strong, steady, and unshakably disciplined. Years later, a new hire asked him how he'd survived that moment, when his job was nearly taken from him, when no one believed in him. He smiled and said, "I believed in myself." That was enough. The truth is, James didn't stay because he was stubborn. He stayed because he had clarity. He knew what he stood for, knew what kind of man he wanted to be. He didn't let gossip rewrite his story. He didn't let fear make decisions for him. And maybe that's the greatest lesson of all, because life will challenge you. People will misjudge you. There will be days when your work goes unnoticed and your character misunderstood. But if you hold to your values, stay grounded, and remember why you started, you'll realize that some of the most powerful transformations don't come with applause or attention. They come quietly, in moments when you decide to stay the course. James didn't chase titles, but they came. He didn't seek attention, yet slowly, respect followed him wherever he walked. His days remained simple. Arrive early, review details, support others, speak less, listen more. But beneath that quiet surface was a man deeply intentional about his time, his effort, and his character. What no one saw were the early mornings he spent journaling, 10 minutes each day, writing not about goals or complaints, but clarity. What mattered, what didn't, what he'd give his energy to, and what distractions he'd release without anger. One of those entries, written the morning after the conference room meeting, read simply, "Discipline is deciding who you want to be every day, even when no one is watching." Years later, after several promotions, James was asked to lead a workshop for new managers across the company. The HR team remembered what he endured. They saw how he responded, not with bitterness, but with consistency. He stood in front of a room of eager professionals, some half his age, and told them the story, not to shame anyone, not to brag, but to teach them what leadership really meant. "It's not about being the loudest voice," he said. "It's about being the clearest mind. And that comes from knowing what you value, what you refuse to compromise." He told them how easy it is to get caught up in office politics, how tempting it is to bend your ethics just to blend in. But the people who last, he said, are the ones who walk through chaos with peace because their purpose is louder than the noise. Someone asked if he had ever thought about quitting back then. James paused. "Of course," he admitted. "But I also asked myself, what story will I tell my future self if I do?" And I didn't like the answer. That's the part people often miss. It wasn't about the FBI walking in, or the CEO handing down justice, or some grand external rescue. The shift happened when James realized that the real gatekeeper wasn't the manager trying to fire him. It was his own mind, his own discipline, his own refusal to be defined by fear or someone else's opinion. By the time the workshop ended, you could feel it. Something had changed in the room. Young managers who once measured success in promotions or praise now understood something deeper. That your real legacy isn't what others say about you. It's what remains long after their words fade. James went on to become a key part of the company's culture transformation. He never wore expensive suits or spoke in flashy metaphors. But when he talked, people listened. Because he had lived it. He had stood at the edge of dismissal, humiliation, and invisibility, and chose to stay grounded. To any viewer hearing this story, there will be days you are overlooked, misjudged, treated unfairly. Don't let those moments define you. Let them refine you. Stay focused. Stay present. Eliminate what doesn't matter. And most importantly, never forget who you are when everything around you tries to tell you otherwise, because the people who change the world don't always start with loud voices. Sometimes they start with quiet resolve.